Thank you very much for your enthusiasm in the beginning of this speech. It's extremely important that we have some support for the speaker. Glad to see all of you here in Brussels. My pleasure to be back with you and to introduce this very important discussion for all of us, not only for Poland, but for Europe. It's a European case and for the world. And I have been also lucky to discuss about this subject in previous COPs, including the one in Katowice, which I have managed. So the just transition has been at the heart of this international debate also. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be at this conference, which is another in discussion of one of the most ambitious projects in the European history, the European Green Deal. And I must admit that I look forward to seeing how the climate law project will be envisaged by the European Commission. I'm very curious how the Commission will approach this complex issue, what the project will contain, and how the European Council conclusions of December 2019 will be reflected. And thinking about it and asking ourselves these questions, I would like to go back for a moment to the sources of our discussion and think about the nature of climate neutrality. I think that an adequate approach to this topic should guarantee that EU, as a political bloc, can successfully manage the forthcoming transition and become a real inspiration for the whole world in terms of reliable climate policy. And in order to inspire, we need to be credible. We cannot be the ones that brag about setting high targets, but then fail to deliver. We must make sure we have what it takes to reach our ambition. And make no mistake, the sign that we are all serious about fighting climate change will not be the climate law enshrining climate neutrality, but the plan that will tell us how to get there. And having said that, let's look at 2030 targets. If you look at the national plans of the soon, we are at the end of January, 27th member states, we are not even reaching the at least 40%. You recall that that was the conclusion of the previous European Council. And I'm not accusing anyone here of being lazy. I know only too well how difficult it is. But let's look at the reasons why member states are not able to reach those targets and look at what can be done at EU level to help them. As for the 2050, there is right now a clear vision. All 28 member states have already set the aim to make the EU climate neutral by 2050 in December last year. We know the destination. We have to plan the journey. And it's quite obvious that climate neutrality is an unprecedented challenge. We need to change the way we produce energy, commute, consume, and treat our environmental surroundings. Energy, transport, industry, agriculture, waste management. We are facing a true Copernican revolution in our current way of life. This means also a fundamental change in the EU's approach to climate policy. So far, we have talked about the EU's climate and energy policy that was from 2008, the leitmotif which guided us. The main addressee of the policy was the energy sector, and its transformation was in the spotlight. But today, the situation is completely different. Achieving a goal of climate neutrality means that we should go beyond energy, and now it should be a policy containing many more components, and the ones that I have already enumerated: climate, economy, society, agriculture, industry, transport, and last but not least, of course, energy. And I will start with the energy sector, which is obvious when it comes to reducing emissions. The approach to this sector is also the easiest because it has been diagnosed very well, and the regulations related to climate protection apply to a large extent to this sector. Changes towards climate neutrality will be implemented mainly by replacing conventional energy sources with low emission or zero emission energy sources, including renewable ones. Of course, improved energy efficiency will also have an impact on reducing emissions. This challenge is getting more difficult given significant increase in demand for electricity, which will result from the transformation of other sectors of the economy. As we are going to electrify other sectors, the demand for electricity will only increase, and including the peak demand for electricity. And the basic issue to be solved here is ensuring security of energy supply. Renewable energy sources are not stable, at least for today. One day the wind blows, another it does not. The same disadvantage applies to solar energy. In this regard, a number of questions arise. We assume that in the coming years there will be a significant development of energy storage technology, but it's not completely sure that we will have all answers in terms of economic and technical feasibility, and we must decide on the role of reserve capacities or new capacities, including nuclear power. Integrating more new renewables will also require us to change the way we think about the grid. If we want to succeed, to provide a business case for investors to create a grid, we need to cope with multiple small energy producers. We need to get rid of the illusion of the copper plate. And I have been working a lot in the Ministry of Energy, and we have been dealing with this issue because we take a lot of focus on the production of electricity, but we do not take adequate focus on the transport of electricity. And this is if we were talking about getting from Paris to Brussels with a car and asking ourselves what is the performance of the motor of the car. As we all know from our everyday experience, getting from Brussels to Paris is not depending on the ability of the motor to provide us with high speed, but on the hour we will be leaving one or the other city or reaching the other one. If we leave by Friday afternoon, then we are sure to be stuck, whatever Ferrari we are driving. So grid should be at the heart of our discussion as well. The European industry, and this is the next challenge, the next sector, and European industry is the main consumer of electricity, is also facing major challenges. And here the first problem arises: costs of electricity and competitiveness of our industry. Industry, to some extent, depends on the situation in the energy sector. In addition, in the case of industry, there is a need, as I said, to remain competitive towards non-EU companies that have not yet been equally burdened with climate fees. It is therefore necessary to design an industrial policy that, on the one hand, will force emission reductions, but on the other hand, will protect the competitiveness of industry and prevent the relocation of production outside the EU. And we have been also extensively using the word of carbon leakage, as you probably recall. For industry, total emission reduction is also a problem. It must be made clear that in some cases, this is extremely difficult. chemical processes whose byproduct will be CO2 will remain with our civilization at least. Therefore, for industry, the development of CCS and CCU technologies will be extremely important. The challenge is that most of our reduction in emissions in the EU is being replaced by imported emissions, thus ruining the efforts of the European industry is making. It is therefore key to mobilize our international partners to take on commitments just as ambitious as the EU. Otherwise, if we go towards climate neutrality, but we limit the understanding of this concept to products and services developed on the territory of the 27 member states, then we somehow miss the point. Because if we continue to consume products and services which will be imported from outside of EU, then in fact nothing will change on the level of our planet. Or even worse, given that within European Union we have quite stringent standards, it might even lead to increased emissions exported from European Union and then imported to European Union in the form of products or services. Let me go to another sector, which is transport. And here emissions have been constantly rising in this sector throughout recent years. And to address this situation properly, we need comprehensive, well-thought, and efficiently conducted actions. And I see great potential in development of electromobility, which not only reduces emissions, but also acts as an energy storage for the future that could improve the stability of the power system. Of course, technically speaking, a lot needs to be done, but it is an interesting hypothesis that we need to take into account. And while industry and energy issues focus on large entities and the need to transform sectors, as it is in the case of energy, in the area of transport, individual solutions and choices are extremely important. For now, barriers to the development of electromobility are perceived by all of us: poorly developed infrastructure, high costs of purchasing electric cars. And these barriers require comprehensive solutions at community level. And we are facing yet here another division within European Union, which is the abundance of capital. If we are facing this capital-intensive switch from existing cars to electric cars, then we need to mobilize capital. And if we are to mobilize capital, then we need to take into account the differences in terms of abundance of capital in different member states. We have one single market, so a Renault Zoe or Volkswagen e-up costs the same modulo taxes wherever we are, whether we are in Denmark, Belgium, Portugal, Poland, Greece, or Bulgaria. But we are not earning the same money. So how to approach this in the spirit of justice? How to make sure that if some of us are not earning the same amount of money, and we should stick here to nominal GDP per capita, then the question is how we are going to face this challenge at the community level in the spirit of justice and solidarity. And all the elements I have already mentioned cannot function in isolation. The policies that we will be prepared in the near future must first and foremost be consistent with each other, take into account mutual synergies and the common goal that we want to achieve. And of course, sectoral policies are crucial. Yet, transformations need to be looked at more broadly, and the sectors put on the picture of the economy as a whole, with particular regard to social issue. We are all very well aware of the benefits transition will bring to us and to our environment. We know that in the long run, it can bring economic savings, health benefits, and create new development opportunities. However, we cannot forget about the present and act in the context of today's economic and social situation. And such transformation will not take place effortlessly. Especially in Poland, we know something about it. Poland already has experienced regarding rapid changes, and the transition from communism to the free market economy in 1989 was a huge success, but it was paid for by the enormous efforts of millions of Poles. In our case, also, joining the EU in 2004 was extremely important, but reminded only an element on the path of catching up with Europe and providing Poles with the European Union level life. Therefore, we are aware of what are the strengths and weaknesses of each transformation, what opportunities are associated with it, but also what mistakes can be made. Poland's ambitions and could be still a reference point for Europe in the planning of transformation, because without taking into account our perspective, the picture will be incomplete and the measures ineffective. This is why we are pleased that the issue of just transition has been recognized and steps are being taken to ensure that transition towards climate neutrality is truly fair and guarantees solidarity for all. And it has been also one of the key topics which was driving my efforts during COP24. I don't know whether you recall, but at the beginning of COP24 in Katowice, at the heart of a very industrial, a very traditional region in Poland, but also a very successful economically, we put this issue of not leaving anybody behind. And if we want to succeed our journey towards climate neutrality in the European Union, then we need not to forget about anybody, not leave anybody behind. And that's a very important message, which is, and I'm very happy, taken into account here. And of course, we should remember that this transition will not be carried out in a year. A just and responsible transition will require time. It's not about revolution, but about gradual, methodical changes. And I hope that the funds obtained from the Just Transition Fund will allow us and regions in other countries to initiate changes that will contribute to their development and provide local communities with a smooth transition. And I hope also this will not be a one-off exercise, but rather than the need to ensure a just transition for all European citizens will now be at the heart of each of the Commission's proposals. That the Commission will from now on consider each time the impact the policies we define will have on the most vulnerable households in Europe.